It's been 3 years since Zimbabweans took to the streets demanding the removal of long-time President Robert Mugabe from office. The late president resigned on the 21st of November 2017, bringing to an end 37 years of rule and sparking jubilant celebrations in the nation's streets. President Mugabe, aged 93 at the time, was, until his resignation, the world's oldest leader. He had previously refused to quit despite the military takeover and days of protests. Mugabe was not forced out after decades in power by a popular mass movement, but rather as a result of political splits within his ZANU-PF party. A letter from Mugabe said that the decision to step aside was voluntary and that he had made it to allow a smooth transfer of power. Mugabe's vice president and longtime ally Emmerson Mnangagwa took over as president, and he pledged to tackle the country's endemic problems and said that free expression would be indispensable in the new Zimbabwe. Well, to take a look back at how far the country has come since Mugabe's ousting, we're now joined via Skype by political commentator Tino Mambeu. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. It was quite a week this time 3 years ago. People took to the streets, and it was people from all walks of life. And I'm sure that even at that moment, they could not have expected the scenes that they eventually saw, particularly when the military visibly was supporting them.
Yes, of course. I think, one of the best moments that we witnessed as Zimbabweans in the past 3 years was the time when Mr. Mugabe announced his resignation. I think you have seen the jubilation in the streets of Harare when the soldiers, accompanied protesters in the city calling for the resignation of President Mugabe. It was a momentous occasion which particularly made Zimbabweans to feel at home, to feel happy, to feel excited towards the end of Mugabe's rule. What happened thereafter is a story for another day, but I would like to say it was a very momentous occasion. Everybody went out into the streets, everybody went out, the Zimbabwean diaspora, wherever they were, London, America, South Africa, people were rejoicing all over. Saying that Mugabe is now going to the end of an era. And, the majority of the people in Zimbabwe had a reason to celebrate. You go into the real areas, they felt that Mugabe was going, it was a good thing. You'd go into the cities, it was the same thing. In the diaspora, it was the same thing. I think it had come at a particular time when everybody was particularly fed up with Mugabe. So, yes, it was a very, very momentous occasion.
All right, take us back to, because we're seeing scenes of the actual aftermath of the resignation, but this time 3 years ago, people were marching and they were on the streets. The resignation wasn't even on the cards at that stage. How was it that people were able to mobilize in that way to march? Because I don't think anything like that had happened before.
Well, it has never happened. It had never happened prior to that. There was some kind of, desire to get rid of the president at that particular moment. People were agreeable that the impediment to the success of the country was Mr. Mugabe. So the coming in of the military to allow people to go into the streets was the icing on the cake. I think, people have always been fearful of the military, judging with its history over time, that you can't go out and protest. The police or the military will come and arrest you or beat you up. So when the military gave a go-ahead for people to go into the streets, then there was no other option. People had to go into the streets because it has been an occasion that a whole lot of people in the country have been waiting for. I think leading up to 2017, you would remember throughout the winter of 2016, it was this flag movement, Tajamuka, and all sorts of civic groups that were coming together, sporadic demonstrations in the city. The message was Mugabe must go, Mugabe must go. But now when the military came ahead, put the tanks on the road, told people to go and march, you'd imagine that, every Zimbabwean would be very, very happy with that opportunity to go and express themselves freely. And, marching ends in the end with the military is something that has never happened, that had never happened in Zimbabwe. And it was welcomed with both ears open. In a nutshell, everybody was tired of Mr. Mugabe's presidency, the international community, the regional bloc, SABC, the African Union, everybody was literally tired. So when the military said it's a go, nobody wanted to be left out of that, of that magnitude of celebration.
All right. Hindsight is 20/20 vision. And I wonder if we can explain some of the things we saw at the time. There was that press conference on addressing the nation on the Sunday night, and we thought that that was the moment he was going to announce his resignation. And then there was this curious piece of paper that I don't know if it was one of the military leaders received in his hand. Did we ever get to the bottom of that?
Look, what we have concluded is that even if Mr. Mugabe were going to resign, he would never have done it in front of military officers. It would have displayed the fact that we were dealing with a scenario of an outright coup. So if that was his resignation letter, it would have been quite improper for the military generals to force him to resign in the manner that they would have done in front of the world on a television set. That would not have happened in a proper manner. But looking back, I mean, the army generals were very clever. I think they did their homework. They realized that, calling for Mugabe's ouster would carry the support of the masses. The only people that they would have to, to convince to a larger extent would be the region. I mean, the region has always said, we don't want coups in Southern Africa, we don't tolerate that. So they had to send a clear message that this was not a coup, it was a popular uprising where the majority of Zimbabweans were now fed up with the way things were being done under the regime of Mr. Mugabe. And I mean, it worked to an extent that everybody believed that this was a popular uprising until we started witnessing some funny events thereafter. But as far as the process was concerned, the coming out of the masses really played a very big part in determining the outcome.
So was it a coup?
Yes, at that particular moment, it was not a coup because people believed that it was not a coup. They believed that they were in control, that the majority of Zimbabweans, the people in the city, the people in the rural areas, the people from different political organizations are working together with their military to take out a troublesome dictator. So at that particular moment, it was not a coup. Unfortunately, things changed when Mr. Mugabe announced his resignation, and ZANU-PF, under its mouth, Mr. Chinamasa said, this is a ZANU-PF affair. Then people were surprised and said, but we thought we were together in this. Now it's a ZANU-PF affair. And where to from then? Then we realized, of course, that this was never about the people, but about a certain clique within ZANU-PF that had been threatened politically and was on the brink of political collapse and political meltdown. So to an extent, after the coup, it became an obvious coup.
All right. Well, let's talk about the years after the coup, because for a moment, I think that there was a lot of optimism. Even the international community looked upon Zimbabwe and were quite prepared to give this country and President Mnangagwa the benefit of the doubt. What, in your view, then played out in the next 3 years?
Okay, so what then happened is, as I've said, ZANU-PF then, out of nowhere, claimed the events to be an internal party squabble that has been solved by ZANU-PF, that the efforts of the masses or the efforts of the people were irrelevant in determining the direction the country should take thereafter. Then, we were going into elections in just under a year, and people started preparing, obviously, for the elections. But I think it was a moment that was missed both by Mr. Mnangagwa in the opposition to say, then how do we go ahead? We have just come out of a tumultuous 37-year period. Do we really need to go into elections that are probably going to be a source of division, judging with the current circumstances of the lack of reforms, the lack of political transparency, and also the fact that we have just come out of a very tumultuous moment? Should we then go ahead and have an electoral process? I think what should have happened then is, let's try and find one another as Zimbabweans and say we have managed, at least at this stage, to remove at that particular time an obstacle in the name of Robert Mugabe. How then do we proceed as a people united for the sake of one common goal? But unfortunately, greedy and self-worthiness among its, people in ZANU-PF at that particular moment came into their way, and with also some kind of pressure that was beginning to pile on Mr. Mnangagwa from the other sectors. He wanted to prove that he is a man that is out to do a job, and also that he is a man that is wanted by the people. Look, the people had come into the streets, and they were carrying placards written by Mnangagwa, by Chiwenga, It was some kind of a confidence booster for him. So he concluded that if he would go into any electoral process, he was obviously going to win that. Bearing in mind also that we had just lost the icon of the struggle in the name of President Morgan Tsvangirai. So those factors then probably would have influenced ZANU-PF to think that they were going to get a clean victory in the elections. And unfortunately, things were not to be so. And we then had people being shot immediately after the elections because of certain issues that had arisen then. So in a nutshell, Zimbabwe at the right moment, the right circumstances and environment to start again, to reboot, reset, find one another, speak with one voice and say, what do we do? Is it elections that we really need in Zimbabwe? I don't think people in Zimbabwe are so fond and so keen about elections. They actually are worried about the bread and butter issues. And as to who is the leader at that particular moment in time, I think it was not really necessary. Mr. Mnangagwa had been handed over the presidency by virtue of military participation and also the people participating in the streets.
So 3 years later, what is the state of play in terms of the politics of the country? We see a ZANU-PF that is much the same as it's always been, some might say with a firmer hand, but an opposition that's very difficult to understand what is happening because, court cases and people being recalled in parliament and names being changed. What is the state of play?
Look, you ask a very, very important question. This question probably would be answered by looking at the feeling of the protester on 17 to 25, between 17 and 21 on November, as to say what was the anticipation of the protester. What did the protester have in mind? What was he hoping for? So the protester was saying, goodbye, Mr. Mugabe, goodbye, police brutality, goodbye, economic failure, goodbye, the lack of freedom of expression. They were welcoming a period of self-worth. We were welcoming a period of job opportunities. We were welcoming a period of, freedom, just the general sense of being a Zimbabwean, just feeling free without the influence of the state. So if we look at that and say, yes, that been realized, you will find out that to a very large extent, the situation has not literally changed. The situation has tended to remain more of the same. There are improvements, slight improvements here and there, and also change of tactic. I would say, for an example, we would know that Mugabe's state was a police state. You would have police harassing people left, right, and center. You would have roadblocks 10 meters apart along the highways. You would have police doing as they wish. But in the current dispensation of Mr. Mnangagwa, there's been a little bit of restraint as to how police behave themselves, how do they interact with the public. But he has also shifted into another area, differing the tactic from the previous administration, where now he seems to be having a hand in abusing or turning around the judiciary, where judges feel threatened or they are threatened, where judgments have got to go through the Chief Justice before they can be passed. There's now some kind of interference in the way the judicial system is now working. And not only that, they have also gone a gear ahead and said the military has now become, instead of the police, the state now relies more frequently on the military to quell dissent. So comparing Mr. Mugabe and Mr. Mnangagwa, there is some kind of extreme force or added force in terms of how they respond to public outcry or public dissent. So you see Mr. Mnangagwa relying more on the military, relying more on manipulating the judiciary and stuff like that. But we also, we can't speak about that and not mention what he has also been trying to do on the economy. on the infrastructure and the general welfare of Zimbabweans, you would realize that there seems to have been some improvements on the construction of roads. I think you would have noticed that even though we have had COVID for the rest of this year, there's been activity in the manner in which our roads have been improved. You go into the cities, you go into the trunk roads, the main roads, the highways. There's been some activity there. So that work is happening at the with the government trying to use its valuable resources to try and see how they can assist in the infrastructure development. You would also have seen the improvement in the electricity supply. I think there is not much of load shedding compared to the time of Mr. Mugabe. That's one of the positives that we can want to point out the current dispensation. And also the mere fact that there's some kind of liberalization in the market where food is now available, people are free to buy and sell in a partially better manner than you would have seen. So the fuel situation also, it was a problem previously, now it's beginning to improve, and we hope that it continues to improve. But there's also one problem that they inherited from the previous dispensation, the issue of policy uncertainty. You find today they say, no, the US dollar is the currency. Tomorrow morning they say, no, if you charge anything in US dollars, then you are going to be arrested. So we don't understand whether this administration knows what it is doing or it doesn't know what it's doing. And that may also point out the mere fact that the leader himself, Mr. Mnangagwa, does not understand the economic valuables, does not understand economic principles, or is a man that is unable to hire few talent that is able to deliver. So there are certain areas, in a nutshell, that we can say he has been trying his best, albeit probably some limitations in his personal capacity. You know, you can always go as far as you can. You can always perform as much as your capacity allows you to perform. You can't outperform yourself in any event. Just like an athlete, they would never run better than they could.
Okay, Mr. Mambeu, thank you so much indeed for taking us back in time and reflecting on what's happened since these interesting days of 2017. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's political commentator Tino Mambeu, helping us remember it was this week, between the 17th and the 21st of November, that Zimbabweans marched in their numbers, and eventually Robert Mugabe resigned on the 21st of November 2017. A new dispensation came into being, and that is what Zimbabwe is enjoying and dealing with at this time.